Good evening. Everybody has a seat, someplace that you can be comfortable and see what's going on. Welcome. My name is Mike Thompson, and I'm a religious studies professor here, and we are very glad that you're with us. This is going to be a special evening. The topic of the evening deals with a civil conversation in a pluralistic setting, pluralistic society. And at its best, I would suggest that that's what a university should offer. A university should offer the opportunity to answer the questions it can answer. And we have a lot of folks at OSU in the technical areas and in the sciences and in those kinds of things that provide answers. But a university should also be completely at ease with asking questions, including those that we can't necessarily answer. The Native American Student Association has been good enough to serve as our campus sponsor for this particular event, and we thank them for that. We have four good men that are going to be leading us tonight, four intelligent men, four men of accomplishment, four good guys. They're going to be talking to you, they're going to be talking to one another. Later in the evening, you will get a chance to ask some questions, and we look forward to that. Now, you should probably have a program in hand, and we're going to try to follow that if we can. Well, let me say this. In a nation like the United States, pluralism is as much a part of who we are as it is any nation in the world. And that continues to increase as we have more and more people join us from all around the world. Well, the more people you get together, the more ideas you have. We do not all agree, but thank goodness that we can listen and we can hear and we can speak with sensitivity, and occasionally we can choose to simply be quiet. All of those are proper things, and I suspect they will all come up this evening. Later on in the evening, we are going to give you a chance to ask questions, and I'll give some more instructions at that particular time. But first, let me introduce these gentlemen on the stage behind me. I'll just start over to the right. Stuart McAliister and Andy Bannister. These gentlemen are part of the Ravi Zacharias International Ministry. They are guys who are travelers and speakers and apologists for the Christian faith. Stuart calls Scotland his roots. Andy is a Brit, but he is also a confused Canadian. And we are glad to have them in Oklahoma. Red McCall and Clayton are Oklahomans. They are both part of Oklahoma Atheists. And by the way, Oklahoma Atheists is what we could consider a pretty booming organization, growing quickly. And a lot of that has to do with the leadership of these guys. Red happens to currently be the president. And I've had a chance to get to know both of them, as I have these two, and have already been enriched today by that. The agenda is we're going to open with opening statements, and I think Red is going to be first, and then Andy. Then we will have some give and take, and then at some point we'll open up for you, and then we will have a closure. We will keep the schedule. I'm leaving at 9 o'clock, whether we are through or not, but we're really glad you're here. So thank you. Would you join me in welcoming these campus guests? And I will turn it over at this point to Red McCall.
Hello, everyone. My name is Red McCall. I am the president of Oklahoma Atheists. We are the 5th largest atheist community meetup group in the world. Out of 860 meetup groups that are atheist, we are the 5th largest. So that's 1,800 members here in the Oklahoma City area and in surrounding cities. We have up to 30 different meetups a month. So we're really, really busy group. Anything from social, political, to social, political, education, parenting, outreach, volunteering. We have meetups for a lot of different types of people and all over the calendar. I'd like to give a couple of thank yous to Oklahoma State Secular Organization, the Native American Student Association, OSU Navigators, as well as RZIM for allowing us to be here today and sending two of their best. I don't have a good accent, but they have awesome accents, so you'll get to hear a lot of that. The debate came together. We set out about a year ago to basically just kind of have this kind of a conversation. It's not a typical debate where, you know, it's an Oxford style, people get your opinions beforehand, and then we figure out if you change your opinion. It's really just an informative type discussion between the gentleman with RZIM and Oklahoma Atheists. Just trying to figure out how we can be civil, how we can get along with one another, to get rid of a lot of the stigma associated with not being Christian. You know, it's obviously a very Christian state. You'll hear many things tonight that you might not have heard before, so I urge a lot of people to Google a lot of different terms that you hear. If there's something that's confusing, maybe something that you were unsure about, just please get online, try to search, see if you can find information that either supports it and information that doesn't support the claim. That's just being a good skeptic and knowing how to look at information. Just different ways to ask yourself whenever you're going to different websites, how does this website benefit from the information that they're providing me? So, in a sense, don't get your cancer facts from the tobacco industry. Please understand tonight we're going to be talking about some very personal things. A lot of people in the audience here have a personal relationship with God, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. There's no way to really have this kind of a conversation without people that are listening getting offended. It's impossible. Many of you are going to say, why are you speaking this way about my God, about my Jesus? I understand. I used to be a Christian myself, so I just want to apologize in advance. We're not up here to try to offend anybody. We're also here to dispel a lot of rumors about atheists, whether it's that we're evil people, that we're sad people. Being an atheist is a very hard standpoint to have. There's an overwhelmingly majority in the state that are Christian, and being an atheist is basically saying that you think the other people are wrong. But it's the same standpoint as a person that's a Muslim, as a Hindu, as a Native American spiritualist, looking at Christianity. So it's a very difficult standpoint because the rest of the world, as you know, is very religious. Now, the percentage of people that are secular, meaning no religion whatsoever, or even people that claim to be atheists, is a pretty small percentage in compared to the rest of the world that do believe in some kind of higher power, some kind of God. So being in my standpoint, it's very difficult. If I was a Hindu, it might end up being a little bit better of a conversation because it would be a conversation of telling the other person the different proofs that would be saying that your religion is correct over the other one. But I'm saying I haven't been convinced. So kind of going to the next thing, I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist for quite a while. I used to be a Christian. I'm not an atheist because I'm mad at God. I'm an atheist because I've failed to be convinced. I am a blank slate in that sense. I'm very, very open to any kind of evidence, any kind of proof, any kind of, well, like I said, evidence that would lead me to a conclusion. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any. So, like I said, discussions like this can be very difficult whenever it comes to my standpoint of being an atheist. Like I said, once again, I'm just an open slate, so hopefully through the end of the year we can be able to have a little bit more information that's out there, some different things that maybe I can go home and Google and maybe even change my mind. To kind of talk about what it is to be a believer, to be somebody that does believe in a higher power, that is called a theist. I'm an atheist. So it's much like saying typical versus atypical or symmetrical versus asymmetrical. It's a name. Atheist is a name for something that I'm not. Much like I'm also a non-smoker. So kind of the same idea with that. Like I said, I'm not an atheist because I'm mad at God. I can't stress that enough. That seems to be a prevailing thing. I'm happy. I lead a good life. I'm moral. I have fun with other people, and I value community. I just don't necessarily follow a higher power, you know. So that's something I can't stress enough with that. In the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus said, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do unto you, for this sums up the law of the prophets." Now, both atheists and theists can agree that Jesus said quite a few good things in the Bible, especially about humility, charity, compassion. However, the golden rule is not specific to Christianity. There's a poster that's out there, it actually is hanging up in the United Nations, and it's the golden rule poster. There's a Google term. It actually features 13 different religions throughout the world, each of them having the golden rule as one of their tenets. Now, some of those religions predate Christianity. Some of them are geographically isolated away from Christianity. So the idea is if it didn't come from Christianity, because obviously either separated by time or by distance, then where did it come from? Well, I'm of the mindset that it's more of a human moral code. It's a really good lesson to live by. So that's, like I said, please Google the golden rule poster. Now, with the golden rule, treat other people like you want to be treated. And the message that I can say to both atheists and theists is just treat everybody the way that you would personally want to be treated with that. Both want the best whenever we're having conversations. If you're having a conversation with a theist or having a conversation with an atheist, that just listen, don't be rude, don't be pushy, treat them exactly the way you want to be treated, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing up here tonight. It's not a contest. You have to keep in mind that people aren't going to just change their minds right then. So pushing that hard is not the thing you need to do. Give people a chance to do their own research, and they'll convince themselves or not convince themselves. So atheists, to the atheists here, Christians aren't dumb. Not saying all of you think that's the way or anything like that. And same thing for Christians. Atheists aren't dumb. We're not lost. We're not misguided. Same thing for the Christians. So if we kind of come at it that way and try to think that we're on the same page and that we're both intelligent people, and the atheists have just failed to be convinced. Both of us have knowledge that we want to share with each other, and once again, that's what you'll see up here tonight. So, not judging each other, not doing anything like that. I can't say. One of the things I would like to point out also is that not to judge atheists or even judge theists or anybody else based off of your interactions with some of them. People are jerks. Jerks represent a lot of different people in a lot of different religions. So if you end up having one conversation with one atheist one time and that guy was a jerk, that doesn't represent all of us. Same thing with Christians. Having that one person doesn't represent the whole majority, the whole of the entire religion. So don't judge us based off of Stalin. We won't judge you based off of Westboro Baptist. I think everybody kind of agree that they're jerks, and so that's kind of the point I wanted to make with that. So some of the questions that'll probably end up coming up tonight in showing that we are on the same page is, where did this all come from? Where did we all come from? It's a very common question that atheists specifically get, and I'm very happy with saying I don't know. I do believe that the Big Bang provides some evidence. There's a lot of gaps in knowledge. What came before the Big Bang is the common question. I don't know, but we don't know if we even have a way to figure that out. Oddly enough, the same question can also be applied to Christians, because where did everything come from? God. Well, what came before God? Did God have a father? How old is God? Does he have a belly button? So a lot of different fun little questions like that. Regardless of how it all came into being, we can all see that the world is beautiful and that you should treat everybody the way that you want to be treated, and it doesn't really matter how it was created. That kind of knowledge might come, it might not come, so we don't know. So hopefully by the end of this discussion, we'll have a little bit more civility. People can talk with each other. Hopefully by the end of the night, you'll be able to have conversations with other Christians or other atheists or anybody else that's in the room of any other kind of religion, and hopefully make some friends tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Well, thank you, Mike, for your introduction. Red, thank you for your opening speech, and thank you, all of you, for giving up an evening to be with us here. And the first thing I have to say is I do not know what accent everyone is alluding to. It is you people who have an accent. To me, this is normal, but obviously I have a lot of learning to do. It's a pleasure to be with you here at Oklahoma State University this evening. As Mike said in his introduction, I'm British by origin, but now a confused Canadian. I live in Toronto, and I'm still learning my way around North America. So this is my first visit to Oklahoma. And trust me, when you've left minus 20 degrees in Toronto, what you have here is near to heaven on earth. So enjoy it. I'd also like to also add my note of thanks to the thanks that have already been said to everyone who made this evening possible. There's an awful lot of work has gone into making this evening happen. It's easy for the five of us to sit up here and make it all look amazing, but actually without the folks behind the scenes and at the university, so thank you to everyone who's made it possible. Well, by way of introduction, I think it's important to note, isn't it, as Mike said in his introduction, as Red has just shared, that tonight's topic is a vital one. Tonight's topic is an essential one, given the fact that we live in an increasingly pluralistic society. I live in Toronto, as I said, one of the most multicultural cities on planet Earth, where you can choose quite literally from an A to Z of different religions, ideologies, and belief systems. Everything literally from atheism to Zoroastrianism. We have the entire range, those belief systems all jostling alongside each other for attention. Now, of course, what's interesting is just a few generations ago, many secular writers believed that religion would soon disappear. It would be replaced by a kind of secular utopia. We now realize how naive that was. We live, as one journalist put it recently, in the age of religion. While organized religion may be on the wane in some places, certainly the number of people identifying as spiritual, whatever that means, it means different things to different people, is on the rise everywhere. At the same time, my atheist friends like Red and others are increasingly confident and are beginning to organize. It's amazing, that statistic that you shared, that you're number 5 on the list. So, you know, with some work, maybe you can work your way up the ranking there. But so that's pretty amazing. Atheist groups are beginning to organize, often in some places along similar lines to religion. It's been interesting to see some of that cultural trend going on. If you look at the popularity of books like Alain de Botton's Religion for Atheists, or in London last year, the first atheist church was launched. They call themselves the Sunday Assembly. Launched in London, has taken off to huge success, and they're planting now into Canada and North America. They call themselves an atheist church. It's a fascinating movement to observe. Well, all of that rich diversity, of course, raises tonight's question with ever-increasing urgency, doesn't it? How can we live together despite our differences? How can we debate and discuss with civility without dinging one another around the head? Well, I was recently speaking at the University of Victoria in British Columbia on Canada's west coast. And it was an interesting lecture because while I was speaking, a young student sitting at the back of the auditorium was gesticulating wildly during my talk. Every time I made a point, he kind of waved his arms around like this. It was very clear that he disagreed with everything I said. At the end of the talk, we had a Q&A. He came to the microphone, self-identified as an atheist, and then proceeded to ask a series of increasingly complex questions about moral philosophy. And then afterwards, he sought me out, and we debated at the front of the lecture room for about half an hour on a whole range of issues. You know, what does the good life look like? Does atheism lead to nihilism? And so on. For 30 minutes, to and fro, we went. Finally, he had to go. And he shook my hand and he said, "Andy, thank you for today. It's been the most fascinating 90 minutes I've had for the last 2 or 3 years. Disagreed with everything you've said, but it's been one of the best conversations I've had on campus here. You've given me much to think about." Now, as I reflected on that conversation with my now friend, I found myself thinking that deeply encouraged me. It encouraged me because in some senses it's rarer than I wish it was. Because often what happens when people with wildly different views meet and engage with each other, the result can be more heat than light. Sometimes atheists resort to argument by soundbite. Sometimes religious believers dismiss our atheist friends as immoral pagans, and we just simply yell at each other. Well, I'm British, as you will have detected, and thus I'm naturally wired to be a pessimist. But that said, I'm optimistic that it is possible to dialogue sensibly and civilly. In fact, I've just flown in from Istanbul, so if I look slightly sort of dazed this evening, it's because I'm on 6 hours ahead of your time zone here. And in Istanbul, I spoke at an Islamic university, and had a fascinating dialogue there with faculty and with students, and we were able to have a respectful dialogue without it descending to blows. Nobody took to Twitter afterwards to insult the other side, and I found myself thinking, if that's possible in somewhere as politically charged as Istanbul, where East and West quite literally meet, then surely it has to be possible here in somewhere like North America. So how do we engage civilly yet meaningfully in a pluralistic society? Let me very quickly, in the last of my time, share with you 5 principles that I've learned in 20 years of dialoguing with atheists and Muslims on 3 continents now. 5 principles very quickly that I found helpful. Number 1, recognize that we all hold beliefs and we hold them dearly. I think what sometimes leads to argument rather than to dialogue is when one side in a debate tries to claim that their position is not actually a belief. Rather, I think dialogue begins by recognizing something that the French feminist philosopher Julia Kristeva once observed. She wrote, "When I say I believe, what I mean is I hold to be true." And the thing is, every single one of us here this evening, all of us on the panel, all of you out there in the audience, all of us have beliefs. All of us have a worldview. And dialogue is only possible when we actually begin explaining what we do believe, not just attacking the other side. And it's very easy as a Christian to spend all of my time attacking atheists. It's easy for atheists to spend all of their time attacking Christians. That you see, any fool can tear down what somebody else believes. Dialogue begins when you actually explain what you do believe and then allow the other side to do the same. Secondly, show generosity to the other side. Be willing to listen to those who profoundly disagree with what you believe. Try not to misrepresent them. 2 really good contemporary examples of this. The pathos.com website recently reported online the story of Tim Mayhall, a Christian chaplain at an Alabama hospital who is working really hard to help develop chaplaincy services for the atheist and humanist community, who are often denied access to that. And he's going the extra mile to try and help them do that, even though they disagree profoundly with what he believes. That's from the Christian side. An example from the atheist side, one of my favourite European journalists is a journalist named Matthew Parris, very famous British journalist, very well-known atheist. Well, a few years ago, he wrote a very influential article called "As an Atheist, Why I Believe Africa Needs God," in which he describes his journey, his travels through Malawi and Africa, and the positive difference that he'd seen Christian faith make. You see, it takes generosity to be a Matthew or a Tim, because often your own community can turn on you and say, "Why on earth have you said that and been so kind about the other side?" Show generosity to those even who you disagree with. Thirdly, take accountability for your words and be open to critique. A good example of this concerns social media. If we're genuine about debate and civility, we need to make sure that we demonstrate that what we say, both offline, but especially in this age of the digital age, online, is respectful. I often say to Christian audiences when I speak in churches that one of the best ways to avoid the charge of hypocrisy that is sometimes levelled at Christians and those who don't share your faith is to challenge them to, if they see a disconnect between what you believe and what you live, between what you say you believe and what you say, then invite your friends to point it out and to haul you up on it. In other words, be transparent, be open to critique. And if we speak the language of dialogue and civility, but for example our social media feed, our Facebook page is full of ridicule and insult, then we should invite people to critique us and ask us how serious we are. Be people who are transparent. Fourthly, penultimately, reflect on our shared humanity. Dialogue begins, I believe, when we recognize that despite our differences, atheist and Christian, we are all human. Of course, as my Oxford colleague Os Guinness once remarked, to be fully human, he said, we need to know what humanness is. Now, that insight suggests to me that the primary question that may divide us this evening, and we can explore this as the discussion goes, is perhaps not do you believe or disbelieve in God? That's often the question that we talk about in these kind of forums. But actually, I wonder if the primary question is what do you think it means to be human? Are we just tormented atoms in a bed of mud, as Voltaire memorably suggested? Or are we more than this? You see, I suspect that unless we have a concrete foundation for why human beings have a right to their beliefs, why would they have a right to be treated civilly and with respect no matter what they believe, unless we have that foundation, freedom may very quickly descend into insult. And then finally, dialogue requires a commitment to the importance of truth. I hope for each one of us, I'm sure it is for each one of us on the panel here this evening, our primary concern is not cheap polemics or point scoring, but with what is true. Now, when it comes to worldviews, of course, how do we know what is true? Well, determining truth takes hard work and a willingness to engage, I believe, on 3 levels: the intellectual, the existential, and the pragmatic. How our ideas work out in the real world outside these doors. One of my favorite places in the world is a place called Speaker's Corner in London, England, part of Hyde Park in London. It's affectionately known as the world centre of free speech. Anybody can stand on a ladder at Speaker's Corner and you can talk about anything and you can draw a crowd. I first learnt public speaking at Speaker's Corner, and I found it a wonderful environment to learn to dialogue and debate and engage with Marxists, with Muslims, with atheists, with people of all beliefs and none. But Speaker's Corner taught me a really important lesson, I believe. It taught me this: human beings are not going to agree on everything. Human beings are not going to agree on everything. The major worldviews disagree on most of the important questions. However, I believe that despite our differences, that it is only through civil dialogue and debate that we can be encouraged to think deeply and stretched to consider the challenges to the things that we hold dear and ensure that there are really good reasons why we believe them. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian writer imprisoned by Stalin for his beliefs, was fond of this old proverb. One word of truth, he said, outweighs the whole world. One word of truth outweighs the whole world. America is increasingly pluralistic. Some people look at that pluralism and think that the way to deal with difference is to rudely challenge and squash all competing worldviews. Others think we should collapse all the differences and declare truth is relative. But I think the way to a peaceful society lies down neither of those paths, not least because truth is too important to reduce to power plays or to relativism. Perhaps if we can learn to listen and dialogue, what we can instead find is ways to live together, despite our different perspectives. Thank you.
Two fine, clear opening statements, and now let me just turn to the panel in general and say, gentlemen, anyone who would like to respond or you want to open a new conversation stream, feel free to do that.
Do Clayton or Stuart want to say anything? Because they've so far been silent.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I know that that's a common discussion in Christianity, particularly in the apologist communities, to talk about, and you brought up tonight, the worldview question. And to frame it within the context of the Christian worldview, the Islamic worldview, and the atheist worldview. I know a lot of atheists like to push back against that. I'm actually not too bothered by it, because I think that if you're, maybe not as an individual atheist, but as a community, naturalism, not necessarily materialism, and I'll be happy to discuss the difference between the two if anyone wants to bring it up in the Q&A. There is a naturalistic project within philosophy, and that is something that the atheists, at least the philosophers, are in the process of doing, and I know that the critique of that is going to come from the religious side, and it's important that that happens. So both, and from other atheists as well. But so I know that, I mean, you guys, I've looked at some of your videos and things, and one of the things that I know that a lot of apologists like to talk about is the coherency and consistency of the atheist worldview. And you talked about belief being, you know, a stance on something that you hold to be true. A lot of a lot of people who are non-religious or atheists like to say that atheism is a lack of a belief, and that can only get you so far. If you genuinely care about what is true, then it's important that you try to find out what science says about the way the world is and what is philosophically coherent. And I think that atheism is philosophically coherent. I don't have a problem with taking that stance. But I know that the critique of that is important. So I think there's a good place for that to happen in philosophy. So.
Yeah, thank you. I have an accent as well. I'm from Georgia, so I speak like a Southerner. I'm still learning how to talk right. It's not working very well. Now, I really appreciate what you were saying about our perspectives and beliefs. And sometimes when we're trying to describe perspectives of how people see reality, we need systems, and these are tools. As long as we realize that the person, the belief, the idea is always more than the system, that's a descriptive tool. But I think sometimes, I think that what we all share in common is that we're interested in reality. That's what we're all looking for. We want to know what is the really real. We're in the matrix, if you like, and we're trying to find out what's the really real, red pill, blue pill, whatever, and go down the rabbit hole into Kansas. But the search and the hunger is to try to find it. So when we look at other world systems, at some point we're all living in making judgments about reality. We're trying to find out what's the nature of reality. I was raised my father was a Fabian socialist, if that would be kind of the word they would use in Britain. Post-war military generation in Britain, it was basically secular. Religion was past its sell-by date in Scotland. I was not interested in that at all. So the God question was not something that I was dealing with in that sense, but I was dealing with questions of existence. So when Christianity came into my world, or where the God question, it reformed and reframed my worldview by changing what I thought reality was. And so to me, it's not just a philosophical question, and that's the same because I read, as you were telling about, that you had been raised a Christian, you'd walked away from it, and I know there's probably good reasons behind that. We'd love to, and we'll hear probably. But the idea that what we're talking about tonight is how we understand what reality is, how we listen to someone else describe their view of reality, and how do we adjudicate between these views when all of us have to make judgments. And I think partly that's what the conversation's about. That, as you said, there are reasons why we believe, and there are reasons why you don't believe. And I think those reasons are the things at times worth exploring.
I think where the big disagreements are probably going to arise are, of course, on the conclusions that we make about that, but also what does and doesn't count as reasons for believing, and what qualifies as good evidence. And those are things that, those questions go back to the beginning of philosophy. So and they're not settled, but you're going to have to wrestle with that both as a religious or a non-religious person. If you really care about knowing what's true about the world, is wrestling with what counts as evidence for what I believe, what counts as evidence against it. And that's, unfortunately, it's difficult for, there's a tendency to want to say that, that's a scientific question, or that it's that we can know for sure one way or the other. And I'm very suspicious of claims that science can answer those kinds of questions. But it's a tough issue.
Claims of consciousness is obviously a hard thing for science to get around. Is it just neurons firing, or is there something else that's there? For me, it comes down to if there's a soul or not. Obviously religion hinges on that. A lot of religions hinge on that, and so that's a big philosophical question, and that's why it still is out there. It's still a big philosophical argument, the idea of a soul. Can you test something naturally that is then actually supernatural? And so it kind of comes back to the evidence thing, and that's kind of my standpoint on it as well. I'm very naturalistic whenever it comes to those things. Yeah,
I was going to say one of the things I'd like to pick up on that you've hinted there. Clayton, I love I love what you hinted at there in the beginning of your question, that obviously, you know, atheists are quite a diverse group, and I think there's a tendency to, whether it's Christians dealing with atheists or atheists dealing with Christians, to sort of assume that there's a sort of carbon copy that fits all. I learned this the hard way. I sort of, you know, find myself thinking, gosh, I should know this because I've been doing this for so many years. I was in Oxford last year filming a TV documentary and got to interview one of the UK's leading atheists. Not quite Dawkins, we couldn't get to him, but we got to a guy called Stephen Law, who's about okay, you know Stephen or know of his work. And so early on, I said, so, you know, Stephen, I guess as an atheist, you would be a materialist, and so could you explain that to us? And he was very quick and went, I am not a materialist. He went, oh, so I said, would you prefer naturalist? No, I don't like that term either. And very interesting. And what I'm beginning to realize is that diversity, even within your community, within the atheist community, is astonishing. So I think that's a helpful reminder. But to talk about science for a moment, I was interested that you raised the whole kind of sort of the idea that, you know, there are things that science can answer and things it can't. We were dialoguing around this at an event at lunchtime here on this campus, in fact. And so I'm encouraged to hear you say that, because I think many atheists, certainly in British atheism, have played a bit too long in the science-only box. For you, when you obviously, you know, you implied that there are some things that science can answer very well. When you move beyond there, where do you look? Is philosophy something you have a high regard for, or other kind of disciplines? How do you go about sort of navigating reality, as I guess Stuart asked?
And I would guess, I'm sure you talked to Stephen Law, I would guess Stephen Law probably agrees that science has limitations on the kind of questions it can answer. Science can only get you so far. I mean, science only tests empirical questions. Philosophy can examine the logical possibilities. And there's going to be a point at which you have to draw out what the options available are and say, well, we can't at this time pick which one is correct, and we may never be able to. You're going to have that always be the case. There's always going to be, even in potentially empirical questions like the origin of the universe, that's potentially empirical because, you know, if it's potentially empirical if there's, for example, a multiverse. But at some point, you're going to get back to what's known as a brute fact. And, you know, at that point, science, you just have to say, well, this is the way it is. This is what we know to be true. We don't have an explanation for that particular fact. I mean, in Christianity even accepts the existence of that. I mean, it's God for Christianity. There's no explanation for God. I mean, God just is. For someone who doesn't believe in the existence of God, there's going to be at some point at which explanations break down, and you have to say, at least at this point in time, we don't have an explanation for that, and we may never have one. So I'm totally okay with the idea that there's going to be a limitation to questions, and even questions that science can eat around the edges of. Like, I think science can inform some of our discussions about morality, but I don't buy into Sam Harris's claim that science can answer moral questions. I think that's kind of silly. But I think science can inform moral questions, because I think that as someone who doesn't believe in the transcendent, I think that morality is going to be grounded in human nature, and psychology, biology, things like that are going to inform what that human nature is, but how we address that is going to have to be a philosophical, political, cultural discussion.
So the way that we come at questions, or the way that we try and process data, comes through a lot of our subjectivity. I mean, obviously we're all trying to process what we understand life is all about. But I think maybe I'm trying to get here, Clayton, on some of what are the tools. So obviously our reason is one of those tools, and rationality, the use of evidence. But the question sometimes, when it comes to the question of atheism and the question of Christianity or other religions, Islam, Hinduism, or so forth, what qualifies as evidence? I mean, some people seem to think that faith is blind belief, you know, where you basically believe things that ain't so. So faith is a projection onto the universe of what you want the universe to be like, rather than the Christian understanding that faith is a response to something that exists, the initiative of God, and you're putting your trust. I mean, if I put my faith in, in Andy, I have to believe that Andy exists, and then my faith would be that I trust what Andy says to me or does is reliable. So faith is not a blind extension. But when Lord Russell was asked, okay, should you die, and if there was a God, what would you say to him? And he would say, or why you didn't believe in Christianity, he'd say, not enough evidence. But my question, I think, and this is part of the whole postmodern search for reality, what qualifies as evidence? What is, just so that we know how wide or how narrow those boundaries are as to what's submitted as evidence.
I'm a big fan of the scientific method. It's, in America, we basically work off of a capitalist society, where if you have a better business model than somebody else, then you are able to succeed. Science works very much the same way with regard to, like the Nobel Prize. Science works through observation. We gather evidence. We have a hypothesis. We test it. And then we give that data to other people. And those other people go through and they test that idea and verify that your hypothesis actually stands up. And that's a form of evidence. And through the scientific method, and going back to the Nobel Prize thing, if you do it correctly, if you do the scientific method correctly, then there's going to always be people out there that are going to try to see where you failed, where could the answer be something different? And that's how people essentially win Nobel Prizes. So the scientific method, when done correctly underneath the criteria, the 7 steps, whenever those are done correctly, then that to me provides evidence. Is it testable? Can I claim a hypothesis and have somebody else test it without any kind of bias towards the outcome? And that to me is the evidence that we're looking for.
In every dimension of your life, or just in certain particulars, that you use a scientific methodology at all dimensions of your existence all the time.
I really try to do so. Now, of course, there's going to end up being instances where I don't have enough evidence to support a claim. And then that's where a kind of a faith kind of comes in, a belief, if you will. But faith, by definition, is believing in something for which there is no proof. Now, do I have evidence that my car starts every day? Yeah, my car is started every single day. Do I know for a fact that it'll start tomorrow? I don't know for a fact. Do I have to believe that it'll start? Yes, but I'm believing based off of prior evidence. But believing in something where you don't have any evidence is essentially a faith. And that's kind of the disconnect. And you're asking about evidence versus faith.
I think that's interesting. I think one of the things I'd want to pick up on there, and interesting as well, that the diversity within atheism is reflected on the panel. So I'd love to have, if we had more time, to have you two dialogue on science would be interesting. But I think one of the things I'd want to pick up on is I think the idea that, of course, faith is the opposite of evidence, that something you have when you have no evidence. I forget the exact phrasing you use. I think something we probably want to be careful about. That's a very common miscaricature of the way that the word faith operates. I recognize that Christians are sometimes added to that in the way that they've spoken, and I think which has given our atheist friends ammunition. But I think what's interesting, if you look even at what the word faith means, and you trace the root of that, it really means trust. Faith in the Bible and in the Latin idea, and the Latin root of the word means to put your trust in something. The analogy I often use when I got married 16 years ago, I had some evidence that my wife, my fiance then, was reliable, but there comes a point where you put trust, a degree of a priori, but also to a degree not. But even on the evidence that you have, you can decide whether or not to trust. The analogy I sometimes use is, if you're peering over the edge of the Grand Canyon, I'm a hiker, I love the outdoors, and so the Grand Canyon is one of my favorite places here in America. I'm peering over the edge of the Grand Canyon and I get a bit too enthusiastic and I fall over the edge, and I'm accelerating down towards the canyon floor, shortly to be a pizza-shaped sort of stain on the bottom. And as I accelerate down the side of the Grand Canyon, I notice a rather robust-looking tree root sticking out of the side. Now I've got a background in botany, perhaps, and I can immediately determine what sort of tree root it is. I also took a couple of engineering classes when I was at university, so I can very quickly calculate the forces that tree root will take. In fact, I can assess all kinds of information about it. But however much information I have, until I reach out and actually grab the thing, I haven't exercised faith. Faith is not antithetical to or opposite to evidence. The two are symbiotic. And I think that's true for atheism. I think it's true for Christianity. We need to be careful that neither side, I think, sort of try and suggest that one is guilty of operating on evidence alone or faith alone. I think that's where many miscommunications can arise.
I definitely agree with you. One of the things that we get into whenever we have discourses, whenever we end up having these conversations with people, is communication. knowing how to use the proper words and knowing that some words, such as faith, has multiple definitions. The one I quoted was directly from Merriam-Webster. Now, they do have other definitions because the word faith means something to different people and depending upon the context that they end up using it in. So absolutely, my context is different of the word faith versus your context of the word faith. And there are definitions inside of Merriam-Webster to support either one of those.
I'm happy to take on your definition of faith, and let's unpack it a little bit. Do you draw a distinction between faith in and faith that?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear you because the sound up here is
terrible.
terrible.
Do you draw a distinction between faith in and faith that?
I don't think I would be careful not necessarily to draw that distinction.
Okay. Because it seems to me that there's a useful distinction there. Faith in God is fine as long as you believe that a God exists. It seems to me that that's not problematic. But faith that a God exists would seem to me to need some other kind of justification.
Let me push back on that, not in an argumentative way, but I think this is important as we're discussing, realities and how we come to it. And I realize that from what I'm gathering in our pre-conversations, and I really appreciate your point of feeling like a minority in a community where you've been, atheists are and maybe treated with disrespect. And of course, I'm coming from the other side of the scale as a Scotsman, where basically religion is very, very weak in these days, and faith or Christianity is a minority religion, but still there. But to me, it wasn't about ideas so much as an encounter. So when you were saying about faith, I was having a crisis of something that happened to someone who said they had met the living God. Now, I'm living my life one day as a young man in Scotland, doing the party thing, working in a dance hall. I'm a bouncer, doing all this bit. And this girl suddenly comes and says, "What do you think about Jesus?" Well, to me, trust me, I didn't think anything about Jesus. That was just offensive and repulsive. No interest, no idea at all. But then she says she was converted, so I don't know what converted means. She become a 3-room and kitchen, or what happened, Something clearly did happen. It was an encounter. And of course, the language is just weird because I had no coordinates. I had nothing in my world that made sense to that. So when I first came to meet these people who had messed up my life, if you like, or her life, I went along it's like basically the brainwasher. I don't know if she'd been caught by some cult, some sect, or what they were. And I went along with pretty aggressive intentions to sort these people out. And I heard, of course, there was information shared. I talked about Marx and Freud and Nietzsche and all kinds of bits and pieces I would throw out there, a little bit of Darwinism. Not that I'd read much of it, but I had enough to know just to be dangerous. And of course, they were firing Bible texts, which equally were like tennis balls bouncing off my head. I mean, who reads the Bible in well, that was the 20th century, this is the 21st now. That shows you how old I am. But basically, there came a point where I had this growing sense there was something in reality to what they said. Now, the existential moment for me, when I look at this now analytically, is that when I knelt and prayed and said, "God, I need to know you," something happened. Now, but then I'll let you come back. The knowledge, I believe an encounter began in which then other factors of knowledge had to come into play later on as I was trying to understand and unpack that. I could connect my experience to the experience of other people across history and locate it in Scripture, but not just in Scripture, in tradition that gave it veridical power, if you like. So I wasn't the only isolated individual, and it wasn't the only thing. But I can no more say to you, Clayton, that God is not real tonight or is a concept than I could say that Andy's not here, to me. And so I'm arguing a little bit more that rather than a pure abstract philosophical concept, but coming at it from there's something there in the universe to which I responded, I believe, and that's the basis by which I would be coming at the question.
I'm curious how that same narrative that you talk about is really common in the U.S. in the Mormon faith. I think a lot of us here will have had experiences with Mormon missionaries, and I don't think they're very active in Europe, but they're very active in the United States. And my conversations with Mormons, they talk a lot about something that's not entirely unlike Alvin Plantinga. Alvin Plantinga has this idea of the census Divinitatis, I think that's the term, where he talks about, we have this inner sense of God if we go searching for it, and that it's veridical. It gives you a kind of knowledge. Now, I don't have that sense of knowledge. I wouldn't be an atheist if I did. But the Mormon community talks about an idea like that very heavily, and it's really key to their faith. Now, I know that you don't find the tenets of their faith to be, or I would assume you don't find most of what they claim theologically to be very valid. How do you as a religious person, draw a distinction between people who make the claim that they have veracity and your claim of veracity?
Well, when I'm testing any truth claim or any worldview statements or anything, including my own experience, comparison is the mother of clarity. So I have to subject my belief, my experience, my understanding to tests of comparison and evaluation against its key foundations. My experience is not enough in which to base reality. The basis of that reality was that there was a God out there to exist in response, that Jesus had come in the flesh, that Christ had died for our sins, that he had risen, and I could have an encounter with him. Now, as you said, other people have religious experience, but I could only test mine against the evidences that I have. Now, so when I look at other texts, I look at the authors, the reliability, I look at the evidential support for their claims, I look at the historicity, the transmission, and I see if they're reliable. I don't think Christianity, as I understand it, and Mormonism have remotely the same evidential basis. Else I would indeed become a Mormon. If I felt Islam had more evidential basis, then I would become a Muslim. So I've looked personally at these things through critical lenses as best I can. And we've sat, as Andy has said, we've listened to people share with us and come back with their own arguments against and for their faith. And at the end, just like you gentlemen, we have to make a judgment based on what the evidence as we see it, as we summarize it, as we weigh it, and still live. And for me, as I said, this faith makes sense. But going back to this issue of civility, I think it's helping us to understand that there are reasons for these things. I feel you have reasons for not believing, and we have reasons, and they seem very real to us, right, or else we wouldn't be believing it, right?
Of course. Yeah. I was going to say, let me add something, if I may. I mean, I sort of picking up from something Stuart said there. I said in my opening piece that I mentioned Speaker's Corner in London, and that was in a sense instrumental to my faith, because when I went to Speaker's Corner as a young Christian in the mid-1990s, I sort of somewhat cockily got onto a ladder and thought I could sort of take on 250 Muslims and preach on the street and persuade them of what I believed was true. And I discovered that wasn't really the case. And they quite nicely tore me to pieces, filleted me, asked me lots of questions I couldn't answer, and sent me home looking stupid. Everyone should be humiliated in public at least once. It's a great experience. It's part of the British national character, really. That's why we go to international sporting events. And but what I did, I remember going home and thinking to myself, perhaps I need to become a Muslim, because they have all of the answers, I have none of them. And as I lay awake that night tossing and turning, my long-suffering wife kind of elbowed me in the ribs about 3 in the morning and said, "Why are you tossing and turning and keeping us both awake?" And I told her my sorry little story, and her sage advice was, "Well, why don't you read a book, ideally in the morning?" And so what that did is that forced me to actually begin putting my faith to the test. I'd never done that. I confess I had never to that point done that. And so I set out to go, okay, are the things that I believe true, and to follow the evidence where it leads? And I went back to Speaker's Corner 3 weeks later with answers to many of the questions, and they had new questions, and they made me look stupid all over again. But going through that process, and to a lesser extent with atheist friends and Marxist friends at Speaker's Corner, it really was a case of coming out going, okay, it's been a hard journey, but I'm increasingly convinced that the things I believe are true. And I've carried that journey on. That's why I did a PhD in Islam, really, was to push some of this stuff through. And I think one of the interesting questions is really, can you take what you believe, and can you, subject it to scrutiny, but also can you live it out? I think that's one of the other huge questions. You know, we talk about the intellectual level, Stuart referred to the existential, but there's also the living out. And so One of the questions I guess I would sort of turn around to you guys, and I'd love to get your take on. I suggested that one of the questions that, as well as who is God, is there a God, that's important, is the what does it mean to be human question. We touched on that a little bit with, I know, Red, what you said about sort of brain science and mind and brain and those kind of issues. I guess the question I'd love to hear your take on is what do you think as atheists, representatives of the atheist community? I know just representatives you would say, not for everybody. What do you think it means to be human? What's your answer to that question as an atheist, and how does that then unpack in the real world? What does it mean to be human?
Obviously a very philosophical question. The problem that I run into with that is that I am simply a human. I'm species. I am the same difference that's with me, philosophically speaking, is the same difference that dogs end up thinking that, what does it mean to be a dog? What does it mean to be a human? And then you get into the idea of responsibility as a human. What is your responsibility to others and to yourself? And I come from a very science-heavy background, philosophy, so honestly this type of a question is better for Mr. Clayton here to be able to answer. So I will actually pass it on to him for that, because to me, to be human isn't really a well-defined question. I don't really understand the parameters of what you're asking in that sense.
You sound more like a Canadian, actually, but...
I will leave out the jokes.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack with that question, because it's a broad question. I mean, there's going to be I don't think you would have a problem with it, there's going to be a scientific element to that, which is, I don't think that, I think we evolved, we are animals, we have historically contingent, evolutionary, cultural, and we have a history, so that's going to shape that question. I think that you're, of course, trying to get at something deeper than that, which is, meaning, a sense of something above and beyond the base animal. And I'm fine with being called a naturalist, by the way. You can call me a naturalist. I don't have a problem with that term. As a naturalist, I don't believe in the existence of a transcendent. So science is going to go a long way toward informing that question. We have a psychology and things like that. I am not uncomfortable with, there's a tendency within religious communities to say that humans are something higher, or we're not, we're above the animals. I think it's more reasonable to say that we are a kind of animal who is able to think about things in ways that other animals aren't. And that we can, because of that, we can ask questions that other animals can't. And that gives us the opportunity to move into a sphere of discussion where we can create meaning in our lives, where we can talk about ethics. And so to be human is partly psychological, but it's also going to be largely ethical and philosophical. And I have I'm happy to elaborate on what my particular ethical views and views about meaning are, but yeah, humans are animals who can ask questions other animals can't, and can do things that have a kind of meaning that other animals can't have, just because it just happens to be that way because of our evolutionary history and our historical contingencies, and we're lucky in that sense. We can ask those questions, but there's not a kind of transcendent meaning above and beyond. And there's not some kind of transcendent sense in what it means to be human for me.
All right, now we're going to shift gears. We're moving right along. We will now invite you to join in the conversation, and this is how we will do it. We have 3 microphones there, and here. we'll invite you to come and ask a question. And I would ask you to prepare and frame your question carefully. A good question ought to be able to be asked in about 15 seconds. Anything beyond that, it begins to sound like a speech. So, and I won't necessarily call on you. I'm going to continue to hide behind this center desk. And I would ask that probably it would be best if you ask a question to direct it toward one of these individuals so they'll know. That way we won't all be dodging to see who's going to answer it. So Stuart, or Andy, or Red, or Clayton. Okay? I believe you want to be first. Good.
All right. I think this was the lamest debate I've ever heard. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical stuff that didn't really get to the point. I mean, the atheists should call themselves the agnostics because you obviously don't know. What I would ask is, what proof do you have that there is a God? And I would ask you, what proof do you have that there isn't a God? That's where the debate should start. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think the point is this isn't a debate. This was supposed to be a conversation. And so it's a conversation about civility in the public square. So my apologies if it was lame, because if you came looking for a debate, then it would be, I can understand now your disappointment. We wanted to give respect to the atheist position, to hear what they were wanting to say, and we assumed there was big questions coming back to us, and that's what we're trying to respond. As a Christian, or as a person who now believes in God, I mean, I believe that the arguments for the existence of God come in different realms. There's the argument for, I believe that we live in a created order. There's the nature of the world that we live in looks as if, to me, as if it's designed. There's cosmological constants. There's items that make the world seem as if it's designed. Richard Dawkins says, it looks like design, it smells like design, but you can be guaranteed it's not design. That sounds like an opinion as well, but it apparently still looks like design. So I think I'm reasonably responsible to infer that design is real, because the scripture says that there's a God who creates the world. The world looks designed. I have met that God. So I've had experience of God that lines up with what the Bible says, that there was a man called Jesus of Nazareth who claimed to be the Son of God, who died on a Roman cross, who was resurrected from the dead and shed abroad a kind of life that was actually possible to experience. So there are various levels, I would say, the levels of evidential, looking at the nature of reality, my own moral conscience, the testimony of the Bible and Scripture, and my ability to experience that qualifies, in some sense to me, as real evidence about the nature of the universe. So I also have the testimony of millions of people across it, it's not the only thing, who have also experienced the same thing that I have done across time, testify to the same God from cultures all around the world who are testifying to the same type of experience, encounter, and belief based upon a narrative that they have received through Scripture. And so to me, it lines up and makes sense of reality. Is it exhaustive? No, but is it sufficient? I think my answer would be that it satisfies the criteria I need to live my life. Does that make sense?
On my opinion on that, once again, I would like to reiterate exactly what you said. I apologize if you were expecting a back and forth, a big debate, boxing gloves and everything. It was really just a civil conversation between the two. But the Q&A is important, and we wanted to give equal time to that because we feel that that's a huge importance over what we also had up here. Proving a negative. This is a big one. You can't really prove a negative if a positive hasn't been asserted. For instance, can I prove that all reindeer can't fly? I could go through and I could test the theory. I could take them on top of a building. I could push them off and watch them fall. And if I do that with 100 of them, have I proved that reindeer can't fly? No. So I get a couple hundred, more, 1,000. I do every single one. Have I proved that reindeer can't fly? No. Because it's based off of evidence, and saying that that something is a positive and I have to disprove that is really difficult to do. Do I know that there's no Bigfoot? Do I know that there's no Loch Ness Monster? Do I know that we have never been visited by aliens? I don't know that. But for the people making the claim, the responsibility is really on that person, not for us to disprove it. That's the idea. You can prove negatives whenever there is a positive asserted. My windshield wipers don't work. How do I know that? Because I turn the key on, I turn the wipers on, and they don't work. I know. So that would be an example of where there is a positive. It used to work, and now we have a negative. To kind of touch on what he was talking about as far as evidence for design, I wear glasses. A lot of people wear glasses. I don't think that's really evidence for design. There's a lot of flaws in the human body, whether it end up being there's fine-tuning argument. But like with the human body itself, there's a lot of flaws, genetic flaws. 83% of the world is uninhabitable by humans, whether it be on the ocean or whether it be at the caps. Design, if you look for design, if you're looking for something, and this is called a confirmation bias, if you're looking for something, you tend to find it. If you want to count the number of fives that are in your world, you can look and you will find fives everywhere. If you want to look for proof of design to establish your confirmation bias, you'll find that everywhere. Likewise, I might also have a confirmation bias and say that whenever I'm looking at things, I'm looking for things that aren't designed, that don't appear designed. Cosmological constants, that we're getting into a much bigger thing, but basically like speed of light and things that appear to be designed. I also see chaos. I'm able to see the yin, the yang with everything. So I don't feel that design is a good excuse for a creator. Much like a lot of people wear glasses, I don't think that that's indicative that the eyeball was designed by an ultimate engineer. So it's just kind of a difference there, and maybe what some people are looking for is the difference between us, not necessarily what we have in common.
Let's go to this mic so we're equally spread here.
Yes, if I may, this would be a two-part question as well. You spoke about sort of a few of the reasons why you believe in God, and I was particularly interested in, for someone who is seeking after truth and values it, but maybe in between, say one belief system over another, they mentioned Mormonism, what reasons would you give, besides a personal encounter, that might help somebody that's looking for the truth in favor of Christianity? And the second part of the question would be to Red. You mentioned you were a Christian in your earlier years. Could you explain a little bit more about that and what led you away from that viewpoint? Thank you.
Do you want to go first, Red, and then I'll...
Sure. Yours is more of a question. Mine more just a history. So whenever I was really young, I was put into Christian school. My parents sent me to church. I had a very deep relationship with God, so much so, well, let me back up. Sorry, I haven't been asked this question in a while. When my pastor said, it's not so much what would Jesus do, but what would Jesus say? Well, that was a big thing for me. The weird thing was whenever I prayed, I heard the voice of God in my head, and I was never convinced that it was Jesus. Now, as I got a little older and I started learning about different gods, different prophets, I saw some parallels and I saw some things that other prophets did that were just kind of questionable. And I was like, well, if I was to make up a religion, if I was to attribute and make my own prophet, what type of things would I add? And that's what I'm seeing with Jesus versus a Mithra and some of these others. There are parallels. There are things that some did and some didn't. So I kind of got rid of the Jesus thing because I never really felt really connected with that. I felt really connected with God. So to kind of expand on that story, I held on to God for a while, and I went through the Abrahamic faiths, and I did a lot of research with those. And I started asking myself, am I only a Christian because of the family that I was brought up in? Am I only a Christian because of where I live in the world? Would I defend Christianity if I was born in Egypt? No, and that was a big problem. That was a big dilemma that I had. So to try to expand on the story even more, as I tried to find God, and because I knew God existed, I just was on a journey to find Him. I wasn't convinced that Jesus was wrong, but that I couldn't find any reason why He was right over some of the other prophets that are out there, Muhammad, for example. And so I lost the Jesus thing, went on for years believing in God. Ultimately became a deist. We kind of talked about that earlier. And as my education with science and the things that I attributed to God, such as design, I started to have more and more answers. The idea that God created and that God is eternal and all of that just kind of faded away. The answers for morality, the answers for origins, the answers for a lot of things in life, I come to grips with saying, well, maybe I just don't know, Maybe I don't know certain things. And kind of going back to what the other gentleman said, there's theism, there's atheism, there's Gnosticism, and there's agnosticism. They're two completely different things. So I'm an agnostic atheist. I don't know that atheism is right, but like I said earlier, I've just failed to be convinced that the other ones are right. So that's my standpoint on it as of right now. So I don't know if you wanted to counter me on that at all.
No,
Okay.
not particularly, but sure. I'll try and pick up I'll say a couple of things, but I want to pick up the first half of the gentleman's question, but thank you for sharing that kind of personal story. I mean, I think what's interesting is I would begin the answer to the part of the question, which was how should you seek if you are exploring, in a sense, with an overlap with what Red said. I think that the place to actually look is Jesus, because I think actually the part of your story that I'd affirm, I disagree with the conclusions that you came to, but at least how you began the journey is the correct one, because if Jesus is who he claimed to be, that largely answers the question whether Christianity is true. One of the things that I find fascinating about Jesus is Red's comment there about what you would do if you were inventing a religion. I often find myself thinking, do you know what? I wish, in one sense, I'd invented a religion, because it would be a darn sight easier. Because Jesus doesn't actually say to me, do whatever you want, I'll affirm all of your prejudices and choices. Jesus, when he calls us to discipleship, to give up everything to follow. And that can be extremely hard. You mentioned Egypt. I've just come from Turkey. I have many friends in the Middle East. It's very, very, very hard to be a Christian in Turkey or in Egypt or in Iran. It costs you something. It's not a decision you make lightly, and it shouldn't be here in the West. One of the problems I sometimes think with that Christianity is experienced here in North America and in Europe, where I'm from, is that historically it's been for too long too easy to be a Christian. And we've drifted in many parts of the church into a kind of lazy kind of churchianity rather than actually following Christ. And we wonder why that puts people off. So with somebody who's genuinely thinking about searching and seeking, I would say investigate Jesus thoroughly and come to the conclusion, is he who he said he was? And if Jesus is not who he said he was, Christianity falls. As C.S. Lewis, one of my heroes, once famously put it, Christianity, if true, is of infinite importance. If false, it's of no importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. But Jesus is the place to begin and investigate him, take him seriously, and ask the question, is what he said true? That's the place to begin.
If we are a higher animal, is that not transcendence?
Well, I don't think they would want to say that it is. And I'm willing to give them what they would. I mean, transcendence has a historical meaning. I'm okay with that idea of transcendence. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's fine if that's what you want to call it. I just wanted to make sure that idea is divorced from the concept of the supernatural. And if you need the supernatural to have transcendence, then I don't believe in transcendence. I guess that's probably the best answer I can give to that.
Over here.
I think one of his other questions. No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it was this young
I think
man.
it was the middle microphone, actually.
Okay, there's next.
And then that way.
Okay, and then over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess this talk kind of loud. Sorry. I guess this is kind of a two-sided question. Red, if you want to answer it, or if you want to go to the philosophical side, you can pass it on to Clay. But this is really between like Christianity and atheists. This, discussion right here. So why is the discussion between atheists and Christians, like, why is that the only one? Like, why was there some hostility between the two instead of like other religions of the world between like atheists and like Muslim, or atheists and Hinduism, and so on and so forth? And then I guess to you guys over here, the question would be, besides it being just a radically different
religion compared to like all the other religions of the world, having someone saying the Son of God coming to be, or saying a man coming to be the Son of God. Why is Christianity always against the opposite side of things like homosexuality or even atheism or Islam or anything like that? So those are my questions for the two sides.
Okay. As far as why Christianity seems to get a lot of attention whenever it comes to the atheism discussion, that's simply because it's North America, overwhelming majority. In Oklahoma, I believe the last numbers were 92 or 93% overwhelmingly Christian, and the rest were atheists, Jews, Muslims. So when it comes to having these conversations, obviously we want to have an audience, and so that's kind of a big thing. We want to talk about something that a lot of people have in common, and that Christianity is one of them. So it's not like we're picking on it. It's not like there's a big battle between it. It's simply what interests the public whenever having these kind of debates, and that's the simple answer.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I think the question, if I understood, why do we make judgments or distinctions on issues in lifestyles or other faiths? Why do we believe we were true, and why would a Christian or... We all make exclusive judgments because we understand that we believe we have truth. So now, if I believe that I have the truth, and that Christianity is true, and say some other belief is false, that doesn't mean that everything they believe about everything is false. It means that we're true on certain things. And what is the issue that we believe that truth is? For Christians, it's about the existence of God and the question of salvation. If there is a God who saves, either we're right or we're wrong, and there's eternal significance. So we want to at least dialogue and discuss about that. When we're challenging people or other people, I believe that all men and women are made in the image of God and therefore are given dignity, whether their sexual proclivities, whatever their ethnic proclivities, not proclivities, their ethnic designation, or wherever it is. So they should be treated with love and respect. But when it comes to, when we're trying to be in the middle ground, just like we're doing here, we're all trying to clarify what truth is. Or we're trying to at least share together about what's the nature of reality. So we put this out there. It says, Thomas Carlyle said, let truth contend in the marketplace of ideas. If we are wrong, people have to make up their own minds. You can walk away and say, well, I'm not persuaded of Christianity, I'm not persuaded of this, but we will all still come down to a judgment somewhere. And so all we are doing is asking for equal time and equal space to lay out the reasons for the existence of God, the reasons why Christians believe in certain things. We're not asking that everybody accepts it, but we will at least share it to give them the opportunity. I'm not going to force it upon them, but at least they can share it and give the reasons behind it, and that would be our rationale. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, over here.
Okay. This is an election year for a lot of America. A lot of conversation and proposed legislation is out there that is designed to stir the pot, so to speak. How do you think civility can be maintained to educate the populace on matters that are coming from a fundamentalist religious background?
That's a very good question. How do we maintain civility in the public square? Now, let me just say, I'm an American citizen of a number of years, so I came to this country, grew up in Europe, and have looked at your unique components of the American experiment. And the First Amendment is one of the great geniuses of the American experiment. The Congress would make no law establishing a religion, but equally allow for the free exercise of it. So the ability in the problem in the public square is we have fundamentalist Christian or fundamentalist Muslims or fundamentalist atheists. When people won't speak to each other, won't respect the rights of each other, and won't dialogue together. Now, we still have our differences. So in the public square, I think that's part of the problem we took when they created America in the first place. For some people, America was going to be a land that was free for religion. For some came here because they wanted to be free from it, right? But the negotiated public square means that we have to live with our differences. We have to accept due process. Trust me, I don't want to live in a theocratic America, but neither do I want to live in a highly secularized America that's totally secular. It has to have the blend of a room for both. So the challenge to citizenship is a challenge for us to agree to disagree on some things and try to find the common good again for the benefit of all. So what is the common good that will make our life flourish? If all men and women are made in the image of God, and that means every American and everybody beyond, then as a Christian, I should be committed to the full flourishing of humanity. That does not mean accepting everything they believe on either side of the fence, and it wouldn't happen anyway. But reaching out for the common good and not the silencing or the domineering of any voices should be our agenda, I think. Okay, let's go here and here.
As a Christian biochemistry and molecular biology major, I find faith and trust and ultimately creationism equally compelling as faith in the scientific method, and ultimately evolution is equally compelling. My question is do you guys think that creationism and evolution on any way can coexist, or do they have to be exclusive?
What do you mean by creationism?
God created the heavens and the earth.
Okay. Not a question of like age of the earth or anything. Okay.
I think that was a question to both of us. So do you guys want to go, Clayton?
I mean, look, I'm a fan of Ken Miller. He is a Catholic biologist. Ken Miller, he's a Catholic biologist. He actually wrote the biology textbook that was fought over in the Dover trial, which was the last big intelligent design debate. I don't think there's a fundamental problem with some Christian worldviews and mainstream biology. Now, origins is a complicated issue. Abiogenesis is an open question in science. But as far as the political question of biology, that's something for the Catholics and the mainstream Christian groups to fight among the fundamentalist groups about. I mean, atheists are gonna cheer for one side. I mean, I actually want the pro-science side on that to win out. But I think it's fairly obvious which side is pro-science. I don't have a huge problem with religious people who find evolution compatible with their religious faith.
Let me say a couple of words on that one. I think one of the most important things to make sure that we don't do, however we address this question, is to set science and religion at loggerheads. One of the most dangerous things that has happened, thankfully, I think the cultural trend is shifting on this, as there has been an attempt by some on both sides, both the theistic side and the atheistic side, to make out that there's a culture war going on when it comes to science and religion. And I think that's a huge mistake. It's known as the conflict thesis in history. It's the idea that science and religion are in conflict. And actually, if you look back at the history of science, that simply isn't the case. In fact, the majority of those who were the early scientists were Christians. Darwin was surrounded by Christians, both who were for him and against him. It wasn't simply an issue of religion or irreligion. It was a case of what do you think about the sciences. And I think the story of science, and particularly when it comes to, you mentioned evolution in particular, is much more complex than some who have attempted to simplify it and turn it into a culture war have made out. One of the most helpful books on this that I've read of late, if you want a little reading for your homework, it's written by a British scientist called Fern Elsdon Baker. Fern Elsdon Baker, and the book is called The Selfish Genius. And you may recognize the play on words going on there. She's an atheist. She's very clear she's not a Christian. But she's equally clear that she thinks that evolution and Darwin's legacy has been hijacked by some atheists, just some. And that book is an attempt to redress the balance and to set the historical record right and to make it very clear there's no fight here. And it's a fascinating book, particularly in the particular British atheist that she targets. A few of you may have picked up who it is from the title. And so I think that science and religion actually fit together remarkably well. They're answering different sets of questions. I think Red alluded to that earlier. I don't believe they're answering entirely different questions. There is overlap. But we remember at the end of the day that science is a methodology for determining truth in the material world. It's not designed to answer philosophical questions. If you try and use science to answer moral questions, you will run into difficulty. If you try to use science to answer questions of art history or literature or economics or history, you will run into problems. Use science as it was designed to do. It is one of the best things that human beings have ever invented. However, whatever your science leads you to conclude, it's important to remember that the science you do may lead you to consequences for philosophy or ethics or other kinds of things. We touched on the idea that, if human beings are only animals, as we've heard from Clayton this evening, you have to sit and reflect this evening, are there implications of that if you believe that's where the science leads? Many would say that there are, but that may be a debate for another question. But science and religion, there's a perfect fit. There has been historically, and there is today, I believe.
Just a quick addition. Of course, atheism can't necessarily believe in creationism because that's bound in religion. Now, but Christians can either take creationism or they can believe in evolution. It doesn't necessarily mean that one side believes in another. There's atheists that don't necessarily believe in evolution because there's a lot of things that they might not understand about it. So it's a big. Evolution doesn't necessarily mean you're an atheist, but just understanding that there are Christians out there that believe in both, some that believe in evolution and then some that believe in creationism. It's not tied to atheism at all.
Mike, can I recommend, Ken Miller has a book on intelligent design. He's the Catholic biologist that I mentioned. He has a book called Only a Theory, where he deals with I know if you're going to be, going in tackling those issues, his book is an interesting one that addresses some of those questions from a religious perspective. You might find that book useful. Over here? Yes, sir.
This question is for Red. You mentioned at the very beginning, I think it was in your opening statement, about how morality is a derivative of human nature. Oh, sorry, was that Clayton? Okay. Well, I agree that you don't need to be a Christian or necessarily adhere to any specific religion in order to have morality. But my question is, where does morality come from? Because as Clayton pointed out, he believes that humans are just another set of animals, more intelligent animals perhaps. But if we're just animals, then where does that nature come from? Because that clearly sets us apart.
Understandable. I spoke earlier about the golden rule being prevalent in a lot of different religions, and kind of leading to a conclusion, if you look at it from my standpoint, a naturalistic standpoint, that's just something that comes from humans. I believe that that's going to end up coming a lot from empathy. We're able to empathize with other people, and that helps lead a lot of people to understanding the golden rule. I don't like things to happen to me. Maybe I shouldn't do that to other people. Being able to switch those and say, here's somebody that's getting hurt. Should I stop the attacker or not? Goes back to empathy. Why humans have that? I understand that the question is, well, how did we get empathy whenever we don't see that in other animals? Well, the idea is that actually we do. We do see empathy in other animals. And you can look up on Google. You can go to Google and then look up search terms like cat saves cat or dog saves dog from highway, or just a lot of different things that you're able to find that show that it's not necessarily even a human thing, that we see that in other species. Obviously, the next question would be, well, how did all these species get that? We don't know. I don't know. And the answer of God gives an answer, but I don't believe that that's a sufficient answer for me. I want to go a little bit further. I want to go into the psychology of it and try to find out that way. So I don't have a good answer for your question, because obviously it's going to be what they call an infinite regression argument. And so I'm happy with saying that I don't know, but I'm interested to see what psychology and evolutionary science comes up with, and it might be something we look into.
Can I elaborate on that a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah, would you want to? And then I'll say something quickly from our side. Sure.
Okay. So I think I'd like to go back a little step and say, okay, so where do those sentiments come from? Brad says, we're not sure. I'm always hesitant to give evolutionary psychological answers to questions, but evolution is inevitably going to have played a role in that. But that's problematic because evolution that doesn't necessarily mean that we've evolved a morality that is useful to the world we live in today. And so, okay, it's obvious that we have moral sentiments. I don't think there's a huge problem with accounting for those through evolution. You have to weigh that with the world in which we evolved is not the world we live in today. And so what counts as moral is going to be a combination of our broadly universal moral sentiments combined with the world we live in, the contingencies that we have to deal with day to day. And so something like a broadly virtue ethics Aristotelian account, which says that it takes human nature for granted and says it's a thing that exists, and now within the framework of that, how do we be moral? Combined with something, grounding that in moral sentiments, that goes back to Hume, that goes back to Aristotle. I know there's some Christian philosophers that are interested in that approach. Anscombe and Alistair McIntyre both talk about virtue ethics a lot in their writings, and they've pushed that idea forward. I don't think that a virtue ethics account is incompatible with the idea that we're natural.
Yeah, let me just say something quickly on that. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. It's interesting that you ended up with virtue ethics. I did an event similar to this at the University of Alberta in Canada a few weeks ago, and it was a fascinating event. I had a Muslim co-panelist and an atheist co-panelist, and the atheist was the emeritus professor of philosophy at the University of Alberta, and we found ourselves in agreement on many things, actually, surprisingly. And one of the places where the dialogue got focused was on this whole question of is there purpose, is there telos to life? And he actually admitted in public, he went, that is the primary question. He went, because if there isn't, he said, that I genuinely do not see that there can actually be a morality. He said, I recognize that is the case. He said, I think there is one, and my career has been trying to find one without invoking God. Because I think if there is a telos, if there is a purpose, a direction to life, then ethics flows from that. That which is good, and that which is moral, and that which is ethical, is that which aligns with purpose. If there is no purpose, if we are just, as the atheist Bertrand Russell said, a random collocation of atoms, then we hit the problem that maybe behavior might be good for evolution. It might help the species survive to the next generation. But why is the species surviving to the next generation a good thing? In fact, if you look what we're doing to the environment, a lot of the animal kingdom might look around and go, if human beings went extinct tomorrow, it would be fantastic. Thanks very much. And the cockroach would rise and the insects would become the overlords. And evolution simply wouldn't care. There's nothing special about human beings. And the moment you start appealing to evolutionary morality, I'm encouraged, Clayton, that you said you don't like going that direction. The majority of ethical philosophers and moral philosophers don't like going that direction, is it has all kinds of deeply uncomfortable conclusions. One of them is this, that if you rely on evolution for your morality, what you're saying is that innate equals authoritative. I look within myself, I find some urges to perhaps be nice to somebody, therefore I should be nice to them. But the problem is, if we're honest with ourselves, we look inside us and we find other urges. Somebody cuts us up in traffic and we have the urge to get out and ding them around the head with a tire iron. Well, why is one urge good and one urge isn't? And actually, if you push the evolutionary ethical argument to its logical conclusion, what you end up realizing is there's no such thing as moral, there is only behavior. And some behaviors are more helpful for the species, others aren't. But we actually have no such thing as morality. There is no such thing as good. And as Stuart talked about the public good, the common good, there certainly ain't any such thing. And if you're interested in digging more into this, another Google for you, Red suggested Googling. Google the name Arthur Leff, L-E-F-F, Arthur Leff, and then Yale on the end of it, Arthur Leff, Yale. He wrote one of the best papers I've seen on this by an atheist back in 1978, and arguably it's never been answered. And it's a wonderful advancement of the argument that without God, there simply is no ethics. And that's the problem we have to face as atheists. He says it is a brilliant, brilliant, entertaining read. Arthur Leff, Yale.
I'm going to recommend philosopher.
Go ahead. This is funny. This is.
There's a really interesting essay by G.M. Anscombe called Modern Moral Philosophy, where she puts forward two options, a divine command theory or a virtue ethics theory. And she says that a virtue ethics theory is something that we can work with in a secular world. And there's been a lot of work that's followed from her writings, but she's a good starting place, the essay Modern Moral Philosophy by Anscombe.
Excellent.
In order to conclude on time and to allow our closing statements, and my wife knows how compulsive I am about being late, I'm going to have to apologize to those of you. I'm going to take one more question here. And everybody else, I think we're not going to have the time. I do apologize for that, but we need to respect what we said we would do. So we're going to take one more question, then we're going to hear from Stuart, then we're going to hear from...
Stuart's last.
No, he's first. And then
It's Clayton and Stuart.
Oh, well, yeah. We're going to hear from one of these guys. And then we will go from there. So please ask your question, and we'll go from there.
Make it a good one. No pressure.
My question is directed at Red. At the beginning of your statement, you talked about the Golden Rule not being specific to Christianity, how it's seen among multiple religions all around the world, not connected geographically, politically, anything. But is the idea that a human is intrinsically of value, is that same idea seen elsewhere? Do you see a distinction between the Golden Rule and seeing humans as distinctly or intrinsically of value?
Do I see humans of value?
So, for example, Christianity holds that because we are made in the image of God, that is, intrinsically of value. That whatever you do to another person who is made in the image of God, you essentially do to God. Mm-hmm. Just to be more specific.
So with my particular worldview, do I see value in other humans in that sense?
Well, do you see a distinction between do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the Golden Rule, and all human beings being intrinsically of value? And do you see that idea of humans being intrinsically of value across the world in different religions and non?
Okay.
Like you said, the Golden Rule.
Right. So do I see value, do I see that value is in other people outside of the Golden Rule? Absolutely. I'm trying to think about how to answer this and give it in a short amount of time. Value in people, do I think that they're sacred? No, that's going to end up going back to a religious ideology. Do I value human life? Absolutely. Do I think that we should not kill? Absolutely. Why do I find that? That goes back to my empathy. I empathize with other people. I empathize with family. I've gone through great loss in my family. I don't like to see other people go through that same loss. And so my empathy carries over into that, and I feel for other people whenever they go through a loss. I don't want them to go through that. Do I value the other people? Do I think that they're valuable to society? Absolutely. And so that would kind of end up being the condensed version of that. I could go on for that for a little bit, but I think I'll refrain. But does that kind of help answer your question? I didn't see where you sat down. Was that sufficient enough?
It was more or less, where does that thought come from? Where does that idea originate from? Do you see that idea that human beings are intrinsically of value across the cultural barriers? Because we can draw a distinction between others as just being, similar people. Like, Americans, I'll do to other Americans as I would want them to do to us, but those commies in other countries, we can kill them.
I'm a little different whenever it comes to that. I value all human life, not just the people that I'm born in the same country with. So, yeah, I value all human life whenever it comes to that, and I think everybody's valuable in that sense. But do you want to add a little bit to that, Clayton?
Sure. Okay.
I'm trying to think of a good way to be able to put that.
Well, he's asking, what's the origin of those sentiments?
Right.
So you can get at it from two directions. You can give how did we come to have those sentiments justification, which is going to be, you're going to talk about human history and things like that, and the fact that we've made moral progress over time and people are able to see that the world is, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious we've made moral progress over time. We don't kill nearly as many people in this world today as we used to compared to how many are born. I mean, Steven Pinker has a great book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is all about that. But you can explain that from historical contingent perspective, which is it's partly evolutionary, it's partly the ability for us to see that, you know, this kind of action leads to these kinds of outcomes. Or you can give something like a Rawlsian pure reason justification for it, that says let's play a thought game. If we decide to put people in a world, what kind of world do we want to have? And that's one approach. You have to understand that there's going to be some point at which explanations for why we have the sentiments that we have are going to break down. You can give a psychological account of that. You can give a partially evolutionary account of that. We have them. We have these sentiments, and we live in a world where we have to function with the sentiments that we have. So that's a starting place. And from there, what we do with those sentiments is going to be the question.
Yeah, okay, let me say something very quickly, and then I can hand off to you gentlemen to finish. I think the first thing, just to say on that last question, wherever you've disappeared to, that was a fantastic question to end on, because I think it's a vital question to answer. Where does it come from? Because I think unless you can answer that question, not just do human beings have value, atheists and Christians, we agree on that. But why do they have value? Is it just fictional? See, the interesting thing with the evolutionary response that I sense Clayton was sort of nervous with is if you say that, well, the reason we believe human beings have value is because we've evolved that sense. Of course, the difficulty of it is if one is an atheist, human beings have also evolved, presumably the belief that there's a God. 90% of the world believe that, but it's demonstrably, at least for the atheist, nonsensical. So we can't trust what evolution has told us. Religion is the test case. And if we can't trust it in that, we certainly can't trust it in human value, and human value is fictitious. We need something to actually ground human value, I think, if we're going to build anything. And you asked about other religions. Christianity is certainly the only religion that I know. Most of my work is in Islam, but I've studied certainly the Eastern religions as well. None of the other religions would have that idea built into them that human beings are made in the image of God. For Islam, really the relationship between us and God is one of master and servant. We're not made in God's image. Yes, we may be the pinnacle of creation, but we are very much just slaves, nothing more than that. Christianity is unique in paying you the compliment that you're made in the image of God. That's the good news. The bad news is that image is marred and broken because of our sin and our rebellion. But the good news is that God has offered something to restore it in the person of Jesus Christ. And there's that promise of having that image restored and that relationship that we're designed for restored. And then on that basis, we have an actual concrete reason to say why human beings have value. And from there, we can do morality, ethics, the common good, and everything else. But I need to hand over to Clayton because the clock is, right. I know,
It'll
against
be Clayton
us.
and then Stuart, and then I'll close. Okay?
Okay. I think, to conclude tonight, I want to bring this back around to the issue of common ground and where we agree. We share basic moral values. We broadly agree on moral questions. There are going to be issues where we disagree, but broadly speaking, on the really difficult, or not difficult, but really grounded questions, we largely agree. Christians, atheists, questions of harming the innocent, issues like that. We all have a sense of meaning. We agree that meaning is important in our lives. We have a desire for community. And Christians band together. Red talked about at the beginning how active the atheist community in Oklahoma is. People, when they leave their faith, don't leave their desire for a sense of community. We desire to make the world a better place. And we have a sense of hope for our children to make the world a better place than we found it. And we have a sense that we have some level of control over that. We disagree over the reasons that we have these values and the reasons that we have these senses, but we have these shared values, and that's a place we can work together. I want to give some people some resources to continue this examining these issues. If you're interested in atheism, I don't think that joining an atheist group is the best place to start, but if you are an atheist, we're more than happy to have you come do activities with us. But some of the areas you might try are the Pathos Network has some very good atheists on it. The Friendly Atheist Hymn at Meta is a good starting place. The Rationally Speaking blog is a good place. I'm hesitant to suggest Reddit, but it's a very active community. There's some good atheist blogging networks out there. Skeptic Inc. is very good, Free Thought Blogs. And then if you want to read some more on the philosophical discussions, a great starting place is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Podcasts, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I recommend the Rationally Speaking podcast is on all of these issues. A lot of the questions that we talked about tonight are issues that podcast tackles on a regular basis from an atheist perspective. The Partially Examined Life is a really good philosophy podcast. I think all of the guys on the podcast are atheists. I couldn't say for sure because they're tackling philosophical questions. They're not trying to push a particular worldview. Good critical thinking place is The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. It's one of the best podcasts out there. Everyone on it, I think, is an atheist, but they're really pushing a scientific worldview and good epistemology, and that's the foundation you need to answer a lot of questions, and that'll get you a long way. And you'll notice that all the podcasts that I've recommended, atheism and God aren't really the issue that they're talking about. These are primarily educational, and they emphasize science and philosophy. I think science and philosophy, if you have a good grounding in science and you are willing to tackle philosophical questions, then you and I are going to find a lot in common. I'm not really concerned on whether or not you happen to agree with me about the existence of a God. So, thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate that. And since we're given many opportunities of people where they could turn to explore atheism and get atheism ideas, I would say equally websites like our own RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, the Center for Public Christianity in Australia does a great job of giving very fair sight. And here in Oklahoma, Credo House is a good place where you go and discuss with people of faith, no faith, or other faiths about issues of truth. I think as we recognize, we're talking about what's going on in the public square, and I was somewhat distressed in some of the conversations I found out talking to Red with sometimes the treatment that they have received and the kind of a vicious slander and really nasty treatment that happens to them as atheists. And to me, if we are Christians or claim to represent the Christian ethic, then our response to people of faith or no faith should be to love them and to treat them with respect and dignity, irrespective of where they're coming from. So there's no room for that kind of treatment of people under any criteria or banner. So I apologize when that kind of thing happens to you. I've been on the receiving end of that from the other side of the fence, so we understand that that's not what we're talking about tonight, and that's why we're doing this. But the right to believe everything, we all agree, does not means that everything that one believes is right. And so the hunger for reality and truth is something that we're all open to. And we are still in an open society. And I want to draw your attention here to a charter that was drawn up in Brussels called the Charter for a Global Charter of Conscience. And this is an appeal in the public square. It went into force in the European Parliament in June 2012. And you'll hear rhetoric very similar to what we found in the founding of the United States. It says, freedom of conscience or religious liberty is a precious, fundamental, and inalienable human right. The right to adopt, hold, freely exercise, share, or change one's beliefs, subject solely to the dictates of conscience and independent of all outside, especially governmental control. This freedom includes all ultimate beliefs and worldviews, whether supernatural or secular, transcendent or naturalistic. And it's important that we recognize that the right to have a conscience, the right to believe or not to believe. Now, the hard work then comes how we debate about our differences, and we struggle about, are there evidence for the existence of God or not, and what would persuade us and what qualifies as evidence. If we have conversations, perhaps Red and his colleague and others could then meet with some of you, and we could go at it with a more active debate, looking at evidence and facts, but it would still have to be done with civility and love and grace if it was going to be an actual conversation. America needs to balance this today, lest we fall apart, not just in this country, but internationally. A religion is not going to go away. So the idea of creating kind of a secular public square where we take the dustbin and sweep everything religious into and it will all go away with humanity, it's not going to happen. Imagine trying to impose that upon India or the Middle East. So there are kinds of toxic religion and there's toxic atheism, but we've got to find ways to dialogue about our deepest differences and still live together. I commend very much our hosts and welcome us to this. We are an apologetic organization. We believe in Jesus the Christ. We believe He's risen from the dead, and we would go out and witness and share for that. Some people, but we don't try to coerce people. We don't try to impose our religion upon them. We talk about Him, we'll share, we'll point to what we think is evidence, but only God changes hearts. We don't change their hearts. So if God exists, He's in the change business. No, that's not my job, that's His. But I appeal to your better angels, ladies and gentlemen, the university and those who are watching, that we have to work very seriously on these questions together and not demonize other human beings. Find ways to converse, to struggle for truth in the marketplace of ideas. One of your great presidents, shortly before he lost his life, gave a commencement address at the American University back in 1963. And he said this, "So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct our attention to our common interests and to means by which those differences are resolved." You've heard tonight that we've talked about shared rationality, shared humanity, shared ethics. We disagree still on evidential facts that are very significant, and we would have to push these limits further. He said, and if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this planet, we all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we all are mortal. So as a Christian tonight, firmly believing in the resurrection of the dead in the 21st century, I believe that Jesus is Lord, I believe He is God, but I recognize the right for us to differ in these questions, and I hope as we continue the dialogue, as we continue interacting together, we can look at reasons, perhaps explore a little bit more deeper, and hear the reasons for atheism too, and continue this conversation on an ongoing basis. And I thank you for coming and giving us your attention tonight.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm not exactly sure what I conceived of this evening to be, but whatever it was better. And we thank you for that. Thank you, those here. Thank you in the other room. And I think you probably would want to join me one more time in thanking our leaders for the evening. You're dismissed. Guys, thanks.